Hello, and welcome to today's episode of the How to Choose Happiness and Freedom Show. I'm your host, Lauren Foster, happiness teacher and founder of Be Happy First. And I'm continuing on my awesome and fun and joyful quest of having all of my sister authors in the art and truth of transformation for women on the show. And I'm happy today to have with me Renee Dineen. I didn't ask you before if that's how you pronounce your name. I hope it is.
Exactly right. Thanks.
Awesome. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for inviting me.
Yeah, awesome. So Renee has of course, an awesome chapter in the book and a TED Talk. And wherever you're watching or listening to this, just look below and we'll give you links to go and listen to her TED Talk, which is awesome. And all of the other things that we're going to talk about today will be documented so that you can follow up and learn more about anything that interests you. So tell us, Renee, tell us your story. Let us get to know you a little bit about you.
Wow, where to start? Well, I'll try to keep maybe it focused on the topic of, choosing a life of happiness and freedom. About 5 years ago, I made a difficult yet very empowering decision to leave my corporate life, my corporate identity that had really fed me, my soul and my heart and my head in really meaningful ways for over 20 years. I loved work. I loved contributing through work, but I had gotten to a point in my life where it had, how I describe it is, my working and doing life had me as opposed to me having it. And for me, to really create a different sense of freedom and flow in my day-to-day life, I did need to leave. I don't know that that's the case for everyone, but that was a decision I made to choose a different flow and ease in my life. And also at that time, as I am now, I really wanted to contribute in communities and industries and organizations that were not just, the biotech world that I was in. And so there was a part of my decision that was about expansion, but a bigger part of my decision about minimizing the time I spend on my doing life and my working life, and coming into greater choice and greater freedom.
That's awesome. And so the big thing that we're coming around to is the doing as an addiction, and that really making yourself feel good by doing something, whether you want to or not. And then the notion of authentic inaction. And I totally love all of this. And I thought of something that while you were talking, the path that you find yourself on, like in the corporate world, and like sometimes we don't choose our path and we just kind of wind up there through a series of circumstances and the beliefs that we have about what we're supposed to do. Another of those phrases that I don't like supposed to, I don't like have to, I don't like can't. so
Yeah.
so you made this decision to leave your corporate life, and then what?
Well, I love what you're honing in on, which is that I would say for most of my life, I chose it. I chose to work 60 hours a week. I chose to take an expat assignment overseas. I chose to pursue, global, high level roles. So that wasn't something that I was a victim to. I really chose it. And I knew I was a doer from the time I was a child. This wasn't something that just was manifested in the workplace. I had always been a doer, a planner. I'd always been a busy person, and busy was revered, right? Busy was encouraged. Busy was cool. And so I just think what I awoke to later in my life was the pitfalls of that life, and really coming into greater choice around the other parts of my life that had been the volume had been turned down on, or I had neglected, including being a mother who could be fully present in the moments when her children needed her, to be a wife that was more present, to be at home more, all of those other things that we sometimes willingly and other times unconsciously neglect as we pursue our call, our working contribution, our work, the part of our life where it feels like we are in full contribution, right? Something that maybe feels uniquely ours. So for me, my doing life was a big part of my identity, I would say. I was known for it. So flash forward to 5 years ago, when I left, not long after I had made that decision, I really started to name it as an addiction, because for me, I wasn't in control of it. For me, it was taking more than it was giving. For me, it was disrupting my life and those in my life in unhealthy ways. And so naming it as an addiction helps me not only acknowledge its impact, but in a way, stay in recovery, which is the reason I did the TED Talk, is to, one, name it as an addiction so that other people could maybe also kind of find their way into that addiction and discover options for finding their way out if that's what they chose. But I also mostly did it just to, it's part of my own recovery and to stay in my own work, to really stay accountable to what I feel was an unhealthy addiction, and commit myself to this new way of doing life. So.
All right. Okay. So let's define addiction as something that you do because it feels good, even though if it's not good for you.
Yeah.
That it often, it, you know,
Yeah.
right. Most addictions, and this one as well, there needs to be some sort of, how did you figure out that this was a problem for you? You talked about the physical manifestations that happened for you. Do you want to share a little bit about that?
Yeah. I mean, I've been a chronic insomniac since I started working. I've always been a night owl. I can remember taking night classes in college, being in the sorority house up till 2 studying and then not taking a class till 10. That was my rhythm. So that doesn't help. And I've learned since it's a genetic trait. My mother's a night owl, my daughter's a night owl, my grandmother was a night owl. So it's in me. They're also doing addicts. So it's modeled quite well in my life. And I was modeling it for my daughter. And so, naming as an addiction for me was important because the physical manifestations were the most obvious. I started having a stutter. I started having tremors. I wasn't sleeping. I just couldn't settle my nervous system. I was no longer, yoga, meditation, that was like a Band-Aid. And so I started to get worried. My doctor thought I had multiple sclerosis. I did not. Thankfully, it was just stress, but to recognize that I was doing this to myself, and I'd always been a very health conscious person, was alarming at best. And then I think the relational aspect of it, my mother was a workaholic and was absent a lot. And as my children that time were, I guess, 8 and 10, I was really realizing they didn't know me as well as I wanted them to know me. And I didn't know them as well as I wanted to know them. And that was really a matter of lack of quality time. We were living overseas and we traveled a lot for 5 years, and that was our quality time. But when I moved back in 2014, that quality time vehicle was no longer, easy. Just life here isn't the same as life there. And so I had to make some other choices. Yeah. So my relationships, my physical health, and then my relationships were my 2 biggest drivers.
That prompted you to make some changes. And so I want to kind of delve a little bit more into this, because as I go through people in my mind, I'm going, oh, this person is like this person's like this, and then different life stages. So
Yeah.
but back when I was younger and working in corporate sales, I was like that, going 24 hours a day, but I was thriving. And when I didn't want to do that anymore, I didn't do it anymore. So that, and it wasn't really even that hard. So I didn't really have a doing addiction. I was just in a phase of my life that
Mm.
it was appropriate. Does that
I think that distinction is really important. I think that distinction is really important. And for me, the story that I had around being a working mom, being an expat, being a global executive, being blah, blah, those were all parts of my identity that justified my addiction.
Mhm.
And for many years, I would say I chose it, right? No one forced me to do that.
Right.
I think that it became more of a justification. It was way more for me than a phase of my life. Do you need to, work your way up, right? There's all these narratives out there that also enforce that. So I don't want to invalidate that reality, that those become very embedded in our forefront.
Mhm.
However, I don't believe that anymore. And I don't believe that a 20 or 30 something year old should believe it either. I think it's
Absolutely.
kind of BS.
Yeah, it's an either or proposition, and we don't do either or. We do yes and. You
Yeah.
can be busy and be contributing and getting things done, and also be who you are and get plenty of rest and take good care of yourself and feel good and not
Yeah.
be the victim of stress. Right? We get to have it all.
I mean, and my best boss was my first boss. And she said to me as a working mom at the time, Renee, you can have it all, just not at the same time. And I was like, no, I'm gonna have it all. I'm gonna have it all at the same time. I think, oh, thank you. But yeah, no, I don't believe that. And she was right. Of course she was right, but she had wisdom on her that I didn't have.
Right?
Uh, and so I take that quote in. Every person I mentor or coach, if it seems important to say, I say it, and as a reminder to myself. And by the way, adding later, and you don't want to, because instead of just tasting everything, I'd rather savor it.
Mhm.
I'd rather be with it, take it all for what it's worth, and enjoy it fully before, taking the next meal. So that was also, I think, a choice point is, kind of quality over quantity.
Mhm.
And that became another maybe strategy, a way for me to slow down and to say no, so that also I could say yes to the right things. Yeah. I think I at some point as well got myself so yes in that I was having to say no to the things I really wanted to say yes to.
Right.
It's like my tank was just overflowing. And so at some point, I think we're all faced with that decision. Am
Yeah.
I saying yes because I want to? Am I saying yes because this fully aligns with who I am and what's needed? And even organizationally, I do strategy consulting, and I have yet to see an organization that is masterful at saying no, and saying no because they're so crystal clear about where they're going, what they're up to, and what's required. So that really is, I think, a mature, a kind of a executive functioning mastery for an organization. And
Right.
I haven't met them yet. So I'm searching, I'm looking, and I'm trying to help create them, but definitely not finding many.
Well, this is leading edge stuff. Our culture, like you said, we build statues to people who work themselves to death. We prize that. We I'm also a primal health coach, and one of
Mm.
the big things that's so important is sleep in our culture. And we brag about how much sleep we got as opposed to the rest of the world. They think they're doing something amazing because they only sleep 4 hours a night, and they're proud of that. And so you're at a place where you're changing the actual culture of our society. So thank you.
Right. I'm trying to demystify our obsession with busyness, but it's, and stay in my own recovery. As I always say, I'm not there yet. I still say yes when I should have said no. And
Right.
yeah, I'm still tempted to, do it all. I still have a little bit of fear of missing out. All that stuff is still very true.
All of that is still true. All right. So talk to me about how I meet so many women, especially who, when like you have a good morning ritual where you spend some time meditating, you spend some time with yourself and you journal and, start your day intentionally. And this is inconceivable to them. They're like, well, when am I supposed to do that? I get up and I care for my children. I care for my pets. I care for my husband. I care for my house. I do my job. And even 10 minutes in the morning seems inconceivable to them. To me, that's a big giant red flag that you're not managing your life. You're saying yes to too many things. But
Mhm.
well, what are some other symptoms of the doing addiction?
Symptoms. So, yep, there's the physical. There's really, I think there's this inner knowing, almost it usually manifests as guilt or obligation or duty, where you say yes and you're there, but you feel almost like a breaking open, like a tension, almost. Some people, like, I know I've done it again when, my pit in my stomach, my heart starts to just feel tight, my throat locks up. So I think there's, first and foremost, paying attention. Your body knows what's going on first before your head and your heart. Your body kind of takes the first set of beatings. And so I really tuning into that. and using that kind of gut sense, or if it's from here or here, that's fine. But, and that initial, like, just give me time to think. Do I really want to do that? So that's more of a strategy, but I think that the signal is your body listening and tuning in. I think the other signal is amount of sleep. That's a good one. My second TED Talk title is Confessions of an Insomniac, which I haven't pitched yet. And it kind of goes into the dark world of a true insomniac. It isn't just a few restless nights. This is a chronic, I don't know if it's considered a disease, but it's a chronic manifestation of our overdoing life, of our stressful lives, busy lives, unfinished lives, and so it's keeping us awake. And until we value sleep more than most anything else, any other self-care practice, we're at a disadvantage. We're not going to show up fully awake, alert, in tune, in touch, present. It's just impossible. So I think your sleep pattern is a good signal. How are you living your life? I don't know if this directly speaks to your question, but what you described to me as your morning practice is a ritual.
Mhm.
And I think I just did a podcast where I talk about roles, relationships, and rituals that really allow us to step into our full power and our full femininity. And for me, I have many, rituals around sleep, around meditation. Yes. Girlfriend weekends, every few months I spend some time just with my girlfriends. Travel is a ritual for me. Working out, massages, chiropractic care, right? So what are those things that I can count on that feed me, that fill me back up, that nourish me, that are in my control, and that keep me, fully integrated, kind of head, heart, body, and to have a good, healthy set of those rather than just wake up and kind of take life as it comes. So that's what I heard when you talked about your morning practice. And I would say, have rituals, have many rituals, because those are the things we can count on. They ground us, we come back to, and they just keep us, in a way, in a healthy check.
Right.
I don't want to say go check yourself, but we kind of do, because the world will check it for us if we don't do it. So
Absolutely. And I love that the thing that I think is most helpful about meditation is it teaches you to be able to pause and give yourself a second to choose your response instead of just reacting all day long, and then not being pleased with your reaction and finding that you've said yes to 20 things. Right?
Mhm.
Yeah.
And we've all done that. And, one of the practices I say is pay attention, like almost just a self-observation. When that happens, because it will. And in my TED Talk, I say step 4 is, choose, and you might fail, try, give it a go, but you might say yes when you should have said no. And you just sort of sit with that discomfort, right? Be with it, acknowledge it, and then let it go and move on and choose again. And so I think, it's just it becomes a habit to say yes.
Mhm.
And so kind of undoing the doing is reversing the habit, or either replacing it with a new, more healthy habit, or the authentic inaction that you referenced. The practice, the concept of my TED Talk is giving yourself just enough space between kind of the invitation, the stimulus, the ask, and your choice around that ask, that stimulus, that activity, to choose authentically. So instead of just saying yes because you can, doesn't mean you should, but let's just, that you give yourself another option so that whatever action you take, that action is fully authentic. So I call it authentic inaction, because whether it's a second, a minute, or a year, could be for me, like sitting with the decision to leave my corporate life didn't happen in, a moment. It was probably over the course of a year of deep reflection, some research, right? A lot of other things to really make that decision at the right time in my life. And that is authentic inaction. I wasn't deciding, I wasn't doing, I wasn't committing, I wasn't getting myself obligated to something that didn't need me to, by the way. Like there was nothing driving me, no urgency that wasn't coming from me. And maybe that's another thing, is that we think everything is urgent, because again, that's a societal habit or pattern of the world at large. Everything needs to know now, right? We need to keep eating because then we got to move on to the next thing. So that's a myth, I guess I would call it. It's a myth that the world needs to know right now. It doesn't.
Yep, it doesn't.
Most of the time it doesn't.
the other world that I work in the sales world, we deliberately create a sense of urgency to get people to buy, in advertising and marketing and
Mm.
and promoting businesses. And yeah, I resist urgency.
I love that. I think that's right. Resist the myth around urgency. So you don't save $10 by buying now.
Right.
Chances are you probably won't buy it at all if you waited, and then
Yeah,
you'll save $1,000.
right. Oh, that's awesome.
I
Okay.
think that's a really good example of a creating pressure to say yes, by making things so tempting.
Mhm.
And though it's like, oh, it sounds good and I should want that more, but again, we've lost touch. I talk about it creates physical manifestation. It really does damage relationships, but it also then, I think, this overdoing or your doing life having you creates a loss of our truest sense of self and self-worth. And that's my message is, who you are, what you have, and what you've done is already enough. It's
I
already
think
enough.
this is a good time to talk about the different types of doers to help our listeners identify if they fall into any of these categories, and then we'll talk. But then after that, I want to be sure that we give some actionable things that people can start on right now to start embracing and a different way of thinking. Whether it's labeling it as an addiction, whatever the next steps are. Though.
Yeah. So when I named doing as an addiction, I started to look around and saw myself surrounded by other doing addicts. And I started to get curious around what we had in common, was this addiction to doing, but more importantly, like what were our deeper seated reasons, like what was feeding the addiction. When you do addiction work with substance abuse, there often, it could be genetic, but there's usually a trauma, something that happens that triggers a need to numb out or cope or whatever that looks like. And so we're all addicted to something. We're all overly attached to something. So for me, it was, my to-do list. So I named 5 doers, or kind of doing addicts, archetypes in a way. So the first one is the achieving doer. And they really do to be acknowledged. Who they are and what they do is so connected, so dependent on each other that it becomes a real symbol of self-worth. And so they're on to the next thing. What can I do now to prove myself, to be seen as credible, to be seen as important, et cetera. So that's the achieving doer. Then we have the avoiding doer, and they do to kind of put at bay or keep distance from the tougher, bigger, challenging things that are wanting their attention. So they just stay busy and they kind of numb out in the busy and put the bigger stuff off. So you can start to see you get something from it, but it also takes something. And so being aware of those tensions. The third is the controlling doer. They do because they want it done and usually don't want to wait for anyone else to do it. So there's a urgency, a lack of patience, a lack of trust in others' ways of doing things potentially, and a way to be in control. If I do it, it'll get done, right? Like I know I can count on me. So that feeds the controlling doer. The fourth is there's the supporting doer. And we think about the supporting doer as the one who is gifted at being of service, right? They do because they do for others and they're really good at it. And they get affirmed because of that, right? These are the more than the people pleasers. I really say you are gifted at supporting others, but that is not at the detriment to yourself. And oftentimes they do then run very empty and don't ask for anything in return. And then they end up resentful, et cetera. And then the fifth that I talk about is the perfecting doer. And they do because they want it done a certain way. Their standards are really high, and yet no matter how well it's done, it's never good enough. So they're always living with this tension of like, oh, it could have been better. Shoulda, woulda, coulda. A lot of shoulds. You said some words that you don't like. So that's the perfecting doer. So we all share commitments, deadlines, right? Events, things that we need to show up for, and other things we really want to show up for. But the question is, do we have our doing life or does it have us? And are we aware of our reasons for overdoing? And I believe until we get aware of what's feeding that addiction, it's hard to intervene. It's hard to shift anything. So I offer that as a way to identify with that kind of feeder pool in a way, so that you intervene at the right level and in the right way so that you can sustain your, undoing of your doing life and in the ways that it's not healthy in a way that lasts over time. It's not just a Band-Aid. So that's why I offer those.
Also, so one of the things that I teach is to always have a strong vision of the type of life that you want to build. In every area, your health, your relationships, your where you live, what you do with your time, and kind of being the person who is living that life. And then to me, this makes decision making really easy because you can say, okay, is saying yes to this going to lead me in the direction of my dream and the person that I am and want to be, or is it not?
Yeah.
And that just kind of takes some of the pressure off because you have this like rudder for your ship that
Mhm.
helps you to steer and make choices that way. Ah, I like it. I like it very, very much. Okay, so let's assume that we have decided that we have this addiction. I'm a doer, and a lot of the women that I see are that fall into that. What was the next to the last category?
Achieving, avoiding, controlling, perfecting, and supporting. The supporting one,
Supporting and
controlling.
perfecting, I think more because like that, they want things a certain way and nobody else is going to do it. I mean, that might be the controlling because,
There's
and
control in both of those, but yeah, I
yeah.
hear you.
And
Mhm.
so, well, what do you do about the things that must get done? What is your advice for? I mean, I
Mhm.
I have my philosophy because there's nothing that has to be done. But when you spend all day doing and doing and doing, you fall into bed exhausted and depleted, and
Mhm.
haven't managed to wring an ounce of joy out of your day because it was all full of laundry and chasing kids and whatever all of these things are. What's the solution? Where do you start to do
Yeah.
things a different way?
Yeah. So once you've sort of looked yourself in the mirror and like, oh, there I am. Okay, this is taking more than it's giving, right? I'm using it to numb out to something, to avoid something, to control something. So I want greater ease, flow, and grace, right? I want access to joy. I want to be able to rest. I want sleep to be a priority. So, if those are all the things that you're hungry for, and you're ready to sort of be hungrier for those things than the others, the other things that have been feeding you. Um, I think there's a step then of, I always say, like, start with what's right in front of you. So, like, one practice, make a list, right? 3 categories, keep it simple. What, um, what are you currently doing that feeds you, what depletes you, and what's completely sucking the soul out of you, right? Then looking at that list and kind of looking for themes and outliers, and in my TED talk, I say, do you host a holiday dinner or a monthly dinner every month, but you hate it? Like, is that what you're doing? Like, you've committed and you feel like you can't back out? Why not rotate it to somebody else? Why not just say, you know what, guys, I got other things I want to do and I got to take this off, right? Like, most people understand. They really, in fact, they respect you for having good boundaries and making calls for yourself that serve the whole of your life. I look you in the eye. I promise you, you will still be loved. I promise you, you will be still revered, right? Like, all those things will not go away.
Mhm.
Um, I think the second then is to decide what are the things that I've been wanting to do that are calling me, that want my attention, my heart, my time, my effort. Where are those on my list? How much space and time am I giving those? And another part of the reflection is, what are the things I'm kind of half doing because I'm just overloaded that I want to do more of, and therefore what can I take off my list? So it becomes an internal negotiation, but I think there is an analytical step you can take by looking at it all and starting to categorize it in a way that drives decisions around what you're going to do and not do. And then I think the second practice, and I already mentioned, is being very in touch with when a new, like, you're in a project meeting and someone says, hey, we have a new project coming up. Who wants to lead this? Instead of being like, I will, right? That sounds fun. I'll do that, right? Pause. Do I want to do that? How does that fit with where I'm going? Do I have time to do that? Am I the right person to do that? Just a couple questions. And even if you want to do it, but you know you shouldn't, right? Like getting in touch enough with what you're really up to. You'll next time that stimulus or that invitation is in front of you, you'll know what to do, to do or not to do. You'll choose yes or you'll choose no. And hopefully over time, you'll feel good about that. It's going to hurt at first. It just is. It's like starting a new workout routine. It just hurts at first. But once you've ran a mile and then you run 2 miles, right? And you're like, oh my gosh, 2 weeks ago, I couldn't even run a mile. It feeds itself in healthier and more, I think, enriching and sustainable ways. But you got to get the first bit of time, is like any addiction, is hard. I'm not going to lie. It's not easy. Yeah.
Right. And it will be very easy to fall back into that habit as well. I mean, how many years has it been for you? And I suspect when we talk again in 10 years, you will still be in recovery because we never get it done. We're always expanding and evolving and
Yeah. And again, these things feed us in certain ways, but they take in other ways. And that's why I always say, like, maybe in my 20s, and I'm speaking if you have an audience of women or men in your 20s, 30s, 40s, is there's no perfect time. It's not like, oh, darn, I'm in my 50s. I missed it. What have I done with 30 years of my life? Like that's not helpful. And like, to be in a life of choice, to like be like fully in touch with who you are and what you're up to and what it is you really want to effort, is so empowering and so enriching. And you will get so much more out of those, 3 things than the 30 things that shortly after you get through that hard period of rewiring your brain and your nervous system to be able to say no. Some people just innately don't like the word no. So you might need to get over that hump.
right.
It starts to feed you in the place, like start feeding you again, where you're like, oh, this feels even better. That's when you've sort of got over the hump, and you likely have undone the doing enough in your own kind of do crazy world to sustain that way of life going forward. And you might fall back. That's okay too. It's all part of it. It's part of the human condition.
That's right. We get to start again every single day and make new choices every single minute. Okay, so you were unhappy, your relationships were struggling, you were having physical manifestations, and you made all these changes. Now, tell us some of the great things that you're experiencing because of making the decision to live your life in this different way.
Yeah. So I have a practice, coaching and consulting practice, and I don't work more than 20 hours a week. So that's a big deal. And I make pretty much the same amount of money.
Right.
So, saying yes to the right things and being really clear with my clients about the work that I want to do. I say I'm brave enough to do the deepest work with those who never thought they could. I want to do deep work. I want to work with leaders who want me to ask the tougher questions, to really unravel a team's current functioning and have them come into greater contact and greater intimacy and greater vulnerability. So that's my deeper work. And I can't do that 60 hours a week. That would be exhausting for everyone. So really choosing work that needs my best attention and not overdoing it. So that's one big change. So what that means for the rest of my time, I have 2 kids that are now 13 and 15. Obviously, we've been in this year together where we've all had to be more present in our homes and in our children's schoolwork, and being able to take to school and sports, and just be able to do that without like being on a call in the car or feeling resentful because, I got to drive everyone around and I have 10 other things that I need to do. Just feeling the pressure of constantly people having demands of me and expectations, and knowing that it's just a matter of time before I drop a ball or many balls. Like, I don't live with that angst anymore.
Right.
Not this year, but we're big travelers. And just being able, I take 6 weeks off in the summer, 2 weeks off at spring break. I take the ski break in February. I just was off. We went skiing, went to the wine country. So just being able to do things like more life, leisure, and then just the quality of my presence in my friendships, just being able, I was at dinner last night with some girlfriends and just being fully present. My phone was in my purse, like nothing else is on my mind except the conversation that I'm in. So I can't imagine how I lived otherwise, but that's just examples of how I'm living today. And that makes me happy.
Yeah. Yeah, beautiful. If you're able to be in the moment and really enjoy everything that's happening right this second without thinking ahead or thinking to the things that you forgot to do or you didn't get to, yeah, that's such a nicer way to live and healthier and yeah, all that great stuff. All right. Well,
The funny little thing, I used to do to-do lists and then I'd add things that I already did, but I didn't put on my list just so I could check them off, right?
yes.
For the most part, like I have a monthly to-do list, not a daily.
Right.
And that monthly, I'm like, what are the things like, right? Client and personal. And these are like the main, and like before I needed a whole page for a day. Like I can't imagine how I did that for so long. So like once a month I sit down and I review it. I mean, I know some of your listeners that might be like, that's crazy. And maybe some of your jobs absolutely demand a to-do list every day. So, but it's just one symbol that I'm not overloaded, is that I don't have to keep a daily to-do list.
Lovely. I love it very much. All right. Awesome. Well, I think that that's a good time. And is there anything else you want to add before we say goodbye?
No, you'll see where to find me in my notes. I'm new on Instagram, but that's where I'm really the most active right now and kind of posting stuff around this topic. And then my website, authenticinaction.com, under resources, I have scoured the landscape and put articles, meditations, journals, books, TED Talks, podcasts that all speak to this related topic, which covers, stress and burnout and saying no and boundaries and all the other things that touch it. So hopefully you feel that's all out there, free to you. And I really am on a mission to demystify our obsession with being busy and to improve the health and well-being and the access to grace, freedom, and joy. So I really appreciate being on your show. I think your message is right on, and I've loved my time with you. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for being here. So again, the book is The Art and Truth of Transformation for Women. The website is authenticinaction.com, where she's curated all of this great material for us. And again, all of this is listed in the show notes below. So we'll say goodbye to Renee, and I'm going to be back with another great guest next week. I never have that in my head at this time, but it promises to be fantastic. So in the meantime, remember that happiness is a choice, and you can always choose to be happy first. I'll see you next week.
Bye.